And today I was thinking about how Swamiji became part of his guru's work and how I became part of Swamiji's work. And in thinking this way, what came up was the question of the miracles or the amazing coincidences that seem to happen in Yoganandaji fulfilling his mission and Swamiji fulfilling the mission of his guru. And what do those miracles have to do with our lives, if anything? And there's the story of Guruji purchasing his main property, his headquarters in Los Angeles. And Swamiji tells us an interesting fact or two about that. How Master saw this property out on a drive, and it didn't say it was for sale or anything, but he walked right into this private property and he looked all over and he announced, "This feels like home." And even before he was able to purchase the property, he invited all of his students in Southern California to come to the place. And he had a program for them there. And he said, "This place is now ours." And a short time later, the details came about actually purchasing it. He didn't have the money. They were asking $45,000, and he had only 3 months to raise all of that money, which was a great deal of money in 1925 when he did so. And he had it all raised miraculously, but on the last day, with 1 day to go, he was still short $5,000. And then he saw in his mind the image of a lady whom he had helped a couple of times, and he had the intuition to call this lady and explain the situation. And she said, "Well, as a matter of fact, just the other day I received a repayment on a loan, and I never expected to see that money again, and the amount was $5,000, and I want to give it to you." And just before that, when he told his students the amount of money, one of his students said, "Why, it would take you 20 years to raise that much money." And Guruji replied, 20 years for those who think 20 years, 20 months for those who think 20 months, and 3 months for those who think 3 months. He thought 3 months, and 3 months it was. Countless such stories abound surrounding his life and also Swamiji's life. Swamiji, in purchasing the first property that he purchased for Ananda Sangha, this was in 1967, 68. He was very busy teaching more than full time, teaching yoga, teaching meditation in different cities every day all around Northern California. And he wanted to find a place where he could personally get away, be in nature, do writing, have longer meditations. And so he was looking for such a piece of property. And a friend mentioned to him that he should meet the head of the Zen Buddhist Center in San Francisco where he lived, because that man had been looking for a retreat property for the Zen center. And before he even met this man, he happened to bump into him by coincidence. And as it turned out, right at that time, there was a property, but the man needed other people to go in and purchase it with him. And as it turned out, Swamiji, this man, and 2 others were interested in the property. They went to look at it. And when they reached the property, each one of them started walking in a different direction. And they were each attracted to a different section of the property, and the parcels were divided up in that way so that each person got the property, the parcel that he wanted. And Swamiji, as soon as he walked on this land, felt that this feels like home, just like Yoganandaji said. And it was a rare piece of property surrounded by national forests, completely quiet, and as it turned out, also affordable. Swamiji still had to work very hard to earn all of the money himself to start some construction on the property and pay for it in full. When Master first got the property in Los Angeles at Mount Washington, his first thought was to start a how to live school, like his spiritual schools for children, his spiritual school for children in India, in Ranchi. But people were not ready for that. He needed to first educate the adults who were interested in these things, and only much later would children be interested, and would their parents be interested. And as it turned out, this school was not something that Master was able to accomplish in his lifetime. Ironically, 100 years later, here we are here in India, and when we arrived here, some people had the thought of starting a spiritual school here, a how to live school, because Ananda has several such very successful schools in America. But what do we find coming here? That the families, the parents aren't ready, that we need to work first with the adults to incorporate in their minds a more spiritual attitude towards life. And it's a ironic coincidence. When Swamiji first bought that parcel, as I said, his thought was a personal retreat to get away from the students that he was teaching every day of the week for periods of time. But that was not to be, just like Master's dream of a school was not to be. Swamiji started to build a little cabin for himself, and 3 times the cabin, he did not succeed. The cabin fell down. And only then did he realize that a personal retreat was not what was trying to happen. What was trying to happen was a more public retreat. And only then did he think in terms of a temple, a yoga hall, a dining room, and to have group retreats on this piece of property. And then, little by little, things started to fit into place. I mentioned last week, for those of you who were here, I mentioned about how Swamiji in 1972 came back to India after not being here for 10 years. Well, he almost didn't make that trip, because just a few days before he had to leave America for India, his car broke down and he needed to buy a new car. And he explained in the new path, the money for my trip was all the wealth that I had. Should I trade in my car and buy a new one? Or should I keep my money for the trip that I know Divine Mother wanted me to take? I've always tried to reconcile faith with common sense. And here we come to a deeper aspect of these miracles that I alluded to. And Swamiji needed that car. He would need it as soon as he returned from India for his work. And he was visiting San Francisco at that day that the accident happened with the car, and there was no quiet place that he could go and meditate on this question and try to feel an intuitive answer. And no guidance came to him. And yet, common sense tells me that I must have a car when I return from India. I see no reasonable choice then, therefore, but to buy one. And he prayed to Divine Mother, if you still want me to take this journey, you'll have to reimburse me. And 3 days later, he received a letter, and he describes it, from someone unknown to me. Enclosed was a check made out to me personally for $1,000. The letter stated, please use this money as Divine Mother wants you to. And that paid for his trip, and he had already purchased the new car. He said, many, many times in my life have I found Divine Mother's loving assistance, fulfilling my needs, answering my questions. In living for God, I have found the thrill of an unceasing divine romance. Now here's a lesson for us, perhaps introspection. God takes care of Guruji and Swamiji in these miraculous ways, but we ask ourselves, will he take care of me? And how much am I, as Swamiji said, living for God? Swamiji said that the more I live for God, the more I have faith and trust in God, the more all of my needs are met without asking. And Master and Swamiji worked full-time for God, and they didn't have to earn a wage or raise a family or perhaps other responsibilities that you have. And Lahiri Mahashaya is referred to as the ideal yogi householder. But we may ask, well now, how good of an example he really is. Is he really? He spent all of his time in samadhi, floating on the ceiling. You know, can I use that as an example in my own life? And yet, Yoganandaji earned money every way he could, through books, through classes, through lectures, and it was his magnetism that earn money, that drew money to buy this property, even to supply the day-to-day needs of the ashram residents. And perhaps in India, those disciples would have taken care of him. But in the West, he had to take care of them until they got a deeper understanding of just what it was that he had to give to them. As he said, "Lord, you have given this monk a large family." And likewise, Swamiji took on much more responsibility than any head of a household that I'm familiar with. He earned almost all of the money needed to buy the initial property, to do the initial construction, even to support ashram residents for the first couple of years of Ananda Village in California. At one point during that construction of the first buildings, the contractor had told him just how long it would take and how much money it would take, but it took many times that amount of money, and it came to a point where winter was coming and the rains were about to come and the buildings were still uncovered, and Swamiji had to work that much harder to earn the money to meet the needs. There was even a threat of a foreclosure on the property. And the point here for us is it's not the work that we do, it's our own attitude towards that. We can serve full-time in an ashram and still be selfish. Or we can be working long hours and supporting all the members of an extended family and still feel that we are working only for God, that this is our Seva, that we're offering completely to God, offering up our lives completely. And with that attitude, with that Seva, of course, God is going to take care of all of our needs. And so it's our faith, it's our trust, it's our attitude that brings to us these so-called miracles. And in this way, we see that our family is not just our biological family, but the whole human race is our family, and God is our father and our mother. And then when we trust and have faith, we know that He is going to always be with us and support us. And since it's almost New Year's, let me close with sharing Swamiji's first New Year's Eve with his guru. On New Year's Eve, we gathered in the main chapel at the ashram in Los Angeles for a midnight meditation, again led by Master. At one point during the proceedings, he beat a large gong, softly, then with gradually increasing volume, alternating, decreasing and increasing the volume in waves. Imagine this is the sound of Om, he told us, spreading outward to infinity. And at that same instant, 100 miles south in Encinitas, another group of disciples was meditating in the main room of the hermitage there. They too heard the sound of a gong at the same moment as Master was striking it in Los Angeles. One of the monks later told me It was as though it were being struck in the hallway, just outside the room where we were. The meditation that followed at Mount Washington was enthralling. Midnight came. Suddenly, waves of noise swept up from the city below. Factory whistles, car horns, shouts, as countless celebrants ushered in the new year. The door of a neighboring house opened, and a voice with a tone almost of desperation shouted into the night, "Happy New Year!" What a contrast between the frantic, emotional, feverish excitement in the sounds that were being unleashed by the thousands of celebrants around us, and the calm, expanding soul joy we experienced in ourselves, in the sublime peace of our little chapel. And how blessed, I reflected, how wonderful it was to be in this holy place at the feet of my divine Guru. And so with that, I wish you all a very happy New Year, and I hope that you can join us for our New Year's Eve program. And we won't be joining together with you next Tuesday in this way, because next Tuesday is Yoganandaji's birthday, and we will celebrate that together. And so I will see you again then, but not in this context. We will come back again for these conversations 2 weeks from today. Thank you all for joining me.